All right, let's talk about the Miami Hurricanes here for a couple minutes and give us a few minutes here to break down why Miami has pulled off one of the biggest steals of the entire year. A lot of people aren't focusing on this specific move. Miami's had a great offseason. They made a number of great moves in terms of what they've done in recruiting and the transfer portal. They've obviously lost a number of key guys, but there's some interesting data that's just come out. And we just did some really deep diving here. And this is one of the more incredible jobs we've seen from a coaching staff with this one particular position. We'll get into all that in just 1 second. But first, I'm Nick. That is Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, Miami Hurricanes fans, you're going to love this data because obviously, as you get ready for the 2025 season, you had to say goodbye to a lot of great players. Of course, quarterback at the top of the list, but not to be outdone was running back Damian Martinez, who went to the National Football League. He was a very underrated collegiate player throughout his ranks. I think he's going to be a steal in the NFL, but you obviously have to replace a really good, really explosive running back. And a lot of people looked at Miami and said, well, Carson Beck, what are they going to do with Cam Moore? What's the wide receiver position going to look like? But one of the best moves Miami made this entire offseason was getting in transfer running back Charmar Brown from North Dakota State. And let's go into the numbers right here because this is really startling stuff comparing Charmar Brown to Damian Martinez. Let's first pull up and compare just on a raw data numbers the 2024 seasons. Rush yards, yards per attempt, touchdowns, and 10-plus yard runs. And again, Damian Martinez is phenomenal. But if you look at Charmar Brown, a little bit more yards. You've got Martinez with a good bump in yards per attempt, but Brown with more touchdowns and a little bit more 10-plus yard runs. So somehow, this is really incredible stuff. The Miami Hurricanes had a really good running back, one of the more underrated running backs in the entire college football world, in my opinion. I'm sure Miami fans will agree with that. And they managed to go out through the transfer portal and replace him with a guy who may be just as good and maybe in some ways even better. In fact, when you look at the advanced analytics, and let's go into our next chart here to kind of break it down, this is comparing their, according to the guys at Pro Football Focus, for people who aren't aware, all about advanced analytics, grading these players, evaluating them on a bunch of different metrics. If you look at Brown versus Martinez, the overall grade, the running grade, the receiving grade, the pass blocking grade, it is very clear they're near identical. In some ways, Brown is even better. Their overall grade, you can see right there on the far left, Brown in blue, Martinez in red, essentially identical. Martinez with a slight edge in running, a slight edge in receiving, Brown with a pretty hefty edge in pass blocking. So, but again, very, very similar on all of these attributes across the board. So again, Brown is a guy that was coming in to replace Martinez. He was a designated transfer to replace a great player. And I can't tell you guys, it is incredibly rare that you're able to have a veteran, a successful player go to the NFL draft and you're able to replace him with a talented guy that is just as good, maybe even better in some areas, right? It just doesn't happen, right? Even in the area of transfer portal and the NIL and all this coming around, it's not something that you can physically do easily. Let's look at the quarterback position. It's a great example. Cam Ward's the number one overall pick. He had a phenomenal collegiate career, had a phenomenal last year for Miami. But Carson Beck, he's a Georgia guy. He's had some good moments, but his numbers, his performance is nowhere even remotely close to Cam Ward. But a lot of people gave Miami a lot of credit because they said, hey, listen, you lost the number one overall pick and you managed to go on the transfer portal and get a guy who's 80% of them, right? That's a great job. And it is a great job. Like, that's an incredible work because even that's hard to do. But at the running back position, and people aren't focusing on this, Miami has done something that is absolutely bonkers. They lost a superstar running back. He went on to the National Football League, and they replaced him through the transfer portal with a guy who's just as good and maybe even better. That is great work by the Miami leadership, great work by Mario Cristobal and his staff. A lot of people focus on when it comes to recruiting and transfers, the star rankings. So he's a 4-star, 5-star, whatever his random score is. And that is important. I'm not going to discount that. We talk about that on that channel too. It does matter. But if you look at just raw production and raw performance, it's clear that Charmar Brown is a great running back, was that at North Dakota State, and will be that for Miami. You talk about a steal, you talk about a move. There is no bigger move in terms of the value the Miami Hurricanes got based on what they lost than getting Charmar Brown after losing Damian Martinez to the NFL draft. Phenomenal work by the Miami coaching staff. All right, Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. But first, Miami Hurricanes fans in the comment section below, of all the new additions, whether through recruiting or through the transfer portal, which new Hurricanes player is your favorite, right? There's a lot of names thrown around. Beck, obviously we're talking about Brown. Maybe it's somebody else. Let us know your favorite new Miami Hurricane and put them in the comment section below. But Miles, I will hand it over to you now. What are your thoughts on Brown versus Martinez and just everything going on with the Hurricanes program right now?
Yeah, Nick, I think before we get into that, I think when you look at what Miami did as a whole this offseason, very impressive because there's a lot of guys. Xavier Restrepo left. You talk about Cam Ward left. You talk about Damian Martinez left. There's a big hole left on this offense. And what do? They go out first and foremost. They get Carson Beck at the quarterback position. I think it's going to be an admirable. I don't know if he'll be quite as athletic, quite as uh, explosive as a guy like Cam Ward, but I think he's going to be pretty good. I think you're going to get somebody who's 85% of what Cam Ward could do on the field for your offense. What else do? They go out and they replace a lot of receivers. CJ Daniels out of LSU coming over, a really strong 4-star wide receiver portal addition. Keelan Marion, another great 4-star wide receiver addition from BYU. I think one that we like the most, we actually did a video on this, so go check it out, is slot receiver incumbent, next Xavier Restrepo for Miami, Tony Johnson from Cincinnati, a great addition. So able to replace quarterback, replace wide receiver. Then what do? Charmar Brown, running back for Miami out of North Dakota State. They add him too. So I think Brown is an incredible running back. I think he's going to be, like you said, as good and maybe even a little bit better in some instances than Martinez was. But for Miami's ability, just as a whole, as a team, to come out and have such an incredible season, such a great offensive performance, and lose so many top tier skill position players on this team, I say your best running back, your best quarterback, obviously, that's kind of simple, and your best wide receiver, to lose all those guys and then replaced with players that are, I'd say, as good, 85%, if not maybe even a little bit better. That's impressive. I think this is a really great move by Mario Cristobal and co. Just what they're able to do here, what they're able to bring to the table with the transfer portal is huge. It's going to keep Miami in contention, allow them to keep growing, keep rebuilding, because they have a lot of great young players in the wings waiting to come up. But what do when you lose a lot of top end talent? You have to kind of stabilize the boat, keep the ship going forward. That's what guys like Charmar Brown do when you bring him to the table. Is he comes in, him in his own right is a very young player. He's a freshman last year, so they've got a lot of time left with them. And I think he can grow and develop into a nice player. But some of these other guys, some of these older guys like Tony Johnson only has 1 year of eligibility left. You bring these guys in, help them right the ship, help your young players get up to par, and get this thing going back in the right direction after a major loss. So hats off to Miami. I think Brown is an example of what they've been doing, but something they did that to me is very impressive is how they're able to replace such great players like Martinez with guys like Brown.
And you bring up a really great point about what they've done in other positions, but usually, again, what happens, you're not going to get a guy as good. You Xavier Restrepo all-time kind of stuff as a slot receiver. Cam Ward, a special player. So Carson Beck, looking at PFF grades, I just pulled it up just to confirm, based on their 2024 campaigns, it was 88% of Cam Ward. That is phenomenal. You lose an all-time player, you lose a great quarterback, you replace him with someone, at least on paper, 88% is good. That's a great job by the coaching staff. That's great work. That's outstanding. How about you talk about slot receiver? Restrepo, you replace him with Johnson. Based on their grades, Johnson is 81+% of Restrepo. Again, great work. You usually don't do that. Usually you're just trying to find a guy. Getting 80% plus is very uncommon. Most of the time, coaches are basically, when you lose a star, you're just trying to replace him with someone who's remotely capable. Instead, you're getting a guy here who's really, you're losing some, but that's just going to happen when you lose a special player like Cam Ward, for example. But at the running back position, where they lost a great player in Martinez, an underrated player, they basically replaced him with a guy who's 100% when you look at their overall grades, right? 100% of Damian Martinez was replaced by Charmar Brown. And that is a special job, and that's a great steal by this Miami Hurricane staff. And they're as good as anyone in terms of, okay, where can we win these battles and make sure we don't lose too much production at these key positions? And they've done great at that. This is one of the things that they're so good at. But then just speaks to how much of an incredible move it was, specifically at the running back position, to where you crushed it. You did a great job getting 88% of the quarterback. You did a really good job getting 81% of the wide receiver. If those things are really good jobs and really good moves, and they are, how good of it is when you replace your running back with a guy who's 100% of him? This is phenomenal work by the Miami coaching staff and phenomenal work by Coach Cristobal. I'm going to keep hammering it home, guys. This is something that most people haven't been paying attention to. It's kind of slid under the radar. But this is what separates teams that can take the next step versus teams that, kind of oscillate. They have a 10-win season, then a 6-win season, then a 10-win season, right? They have 1 year where they lose a lot of guys and they can't replace them very well. And the next year they have a good class and they're able to do well, but then they lose some guys and they can't replace them very well. Miami is better than any other team in terms of replacing lost talent. And when you pair that with their phenomenal recruiting pipeline they developed, they also have a long-term developmental process as well with a lot of the recruits and prospects they have coming in from the high school ranks. This is all Coach Cristobal. There's been a lot of criticism on him. Certainly the Georgia Tech debacle is something that's going to live in infamy, and the performance down the stretch in other big games are very real red flags. But in terms of how we structure the program and the job they've done in the offseason, there's no one better in all of college football, I'm going to say that very clearly right now, than the head man in Coral Gables.